If you're looking for some new vocal mixing plugins, this is the video for you. I'm going to be breaking down a vocal mixing chain that I'm going to be putting together in real time right in front of you. And as I do that, I'm going to be showing you guys a bunch of different vocal mixing plugins that I rely on in almost every single session and have been doing so for over 10 years. Everything I'm going to be using in this video is from Waves. And while this is not a sponsored video, I do love their tools. I find them to be very economical and affordable compared to some of their competition. I find that a lot of people like to use their plugins, which makes collaborating with other people very easy. And overall, I find their tools just to be very simple and straightforward and easy to use. And that's why I've been using them for literally over a decade, and sometimes over way more expensive tools that I'm given for free from other plugin companies. So this is not a biased video where someone has given me something or made me make this video. This is me actually trying to help you guys and ensure that you guys get the most value out of your hard-earned money. And the truth is, I've spent well over $5,000 on plugins from every type of company, whether it's Waves, Isotope, FabFilter, Antares, and so on. And I find that a lot of times the Waves plugins specifically are the ones that I continue to come back to and use in my sessions, even to this day. They're simple and they just work. And I hope to show you guys that in today's video as well. If you are interested in checking anything out, even if it's just a free trial for something I show you in this video, hit the link in the description down below and you'll be able to do that today. So let's start with noise reduction plugins. And the first one I'm going to show you is the NS1 noise suppressor. Now, this is a great plugin for obviously dealing with noise that might be taking place in the background of a recording. And this is fairly common, especially today where a lot of artists are recording themselves in less than ideal environments. In these recordings, you might hear things like room noise or hiss or body movement, even a fan running or an AC unit running, a fridge. You can hear all kinds of stuff in a recording if you really pay attention. And this plugin is one that is great at removing this background noise in a less noticeable way. Obviously, if you push it too far, it will be too much, but we could definitely use it to reduce some of the background noise on a recording and basically improve its quality. So as an example, if we take a listen to this track here, I'll play it and you're going to hear that I've essentially added some white noise to the recording that's very similar to a hiss you'd hear in a room with a condenser mic if that's what you use to record. You're going to see that by using this NS1, I'm able to clean up that background noise that we're talking about. But first, let me just play exactly what this track sounds like as is with the background noise intact.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee. Makeup, got plenty. She's savage, like Fenty.
As you can tell, it really cleans up the audio here. It's getting rid of that hissy background noise. And I do find that this is my go-to for noise suppression. Even though Waves has some other plugins like Clarity VX that can also be helpful, this one just seems to work a lot better for me personally. So I do recommend you check it out. And when you are using it yourself, be careful not to go too crazy. You could definitely push this up as far as you'd like, but keep in mind that as you do increase it, it's not only going to reduce background noise, but it'll start potentially affecting the intelligibility of your vocal, as it's going to reduce all information and not just noise. So be warned when using it. You can see I'm using it very lightly here, but this is definitely the first plugin that I would recommend you check out. Next, let's talk about vocal gates. And my go-to vocal gate has been this one right here, the Waves C1. This comes in a bundle with several other plugins such as the C1 compressor and so on. However, I only use the gate most times in my own mixes. Now, the benefit of using a gate is it allows you to be a little bit lazy and not need to edit your vocals that much. Now, what I mean by that is instead of having to go in and edit all the pauses in between a vocal performance. So as an example here, we have all these little moments that are pauses, and you can see there's either a breath or maybe something else in the background like body movement, rustling, headphone bleed, and so on. Instead of going in there and manually cropping and deleting or editing these moments, you could use the gate to automatically do this stuff for you, and I find that to be extremely convenient. So as an example, let's play this without the gate. You could hear the background noise that's happening, and then I'll put it in.
Makeup, got plenty. She's savage, like Fenty. Makeup, got plenty. She's savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee.
Now, while I am adjusting it on the fly here, you could ultimately tell that it is reducing the presence of that headphone bleed happening between vocal performances. It's not 100% perfect, and sometimes it still does require editing, but I do find this is a very convenient way to tackle a lot of those smaller issues and help you just be a little bit lazier when it comes to mixing if you choose to be that. Of course, there is other uses for a gate as well. If you want to see a video all about how to use this particular vocal gate, check out the card you're going to see on screen right now to watch a video I did using this exact exact plugin. Next, let's talk about EQ, and I want to talk about two different EQs here for two different purposes. The first one I want to talk about is the Waves F6 here, which is essentially a great surgical EQ with built-in filters, and I like a lot of things about this EQ. Really, I feel like it's the closest thing to the FabFilter Pro Q3 that Waves has to offer, and if you guys have watched my videos, you know that I love the FabFilter Pro Q3, but the benefit is this plugin is literally a fraction of the price of the Pro Q3, so if you don't want to sink that much money into an EQ, this is probably your next best option. And what I love about this is you could obviously use the built-in filters to filter out low and high end, but you could also use each of the 6 bands to either statically remove or add to something, but more importantly, you could use the dynamic modes that it has to essentially reduce the volume of certain frequency pockets in real time, and only when they become a problem, when they pass a threshold similar to a compressor. I like that because I find it to be a lot more transparent than just a static cut, and that's why I prefer to use dynamic EQs over regular EQs, at least if I can, especially for surgical reasons. This example is no different. If I play this, you're going to see that a lot of these bands, they're all flat right now at 0, but you're going to see that they're reducing certain frequency pockets for problematic resonances when those resonances pass a threshold that I've predetermined. So check this out. I'm going to play this and just pay attention to the screen. Here we go.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. I can manage like you GD. Hey.
So you can really hear how it's cleaning up the vocal and creating a better balance in terms of the frequencies there. I'm tightening up some of the low end so it doesn't sound as muddy. I'm taming some of that top end so it's not so harsh or not so sibilant. In fact, I'm actually using some of these top dynamic EQ bands as a de-esser instead of a de-esser. And I actually am not a big de-esser fan, although I do use them. But I would much rather use something like this or even a multi-band compressor to tame some of those problems, because that's basically what a de-esser is. But I find that this is ultimately a little bit more customizable and tweakable, at least for my own needs. So I definitely wouldn't sleep on the F6, especially if you don't have access to the FabFilter Pro Q3 at this time. And that leads me to the second EQ that we're going to talk about, which is an additive EQ, and that is the Puigtech EQP1A. Now this EQ actually models the famous Pultec EQ, which is an outboard piece of gear that you're going to find in a lot of studios pretty much everywhere. It's very famous, very loved, very revered, and I'm also someone that is a big fan of this. And what I like about this plugin is not that it's the only one out there. In fact, there's tons of Pultec emulations out there. There's no shortage of them. UAD has them, all kinds of companies make them, but the difference with this one that I find most important is the fact that it has a built-in gain knob that'll allow you to essentially make up for any volume bias that might take place when you're setting this up. Because I love to use this for additive purposes. It's only a low band and a high band, and of course you can attenuate or reduce, but most often I'm adding a significant boost to whatever sound I'm applying it to. In the vocals here, I'm adding a low boost to just add some more warmth and presence, and a little bit of the highs just to, again, give it a little bit more shine and presence in the top end. But what happens when you do stuff like this is you're going to just now send it out of whack, and what's going to happen is it's going to sound a lot louder, and you might actually perceive that as better, even though it's not. Having this built-in gain knob allows you to adjust that volume and essentially make up for the fact that you're adding all this volume to it, and that'll help you make a more calculated or unbiased decision. Even here, you can see that I'm reducing the volume of this by 3.2 dB, even though I'm adding just under 2 dB to the low end at 100 and just over 4 dB, which is pretty significant, at 10K. Let's check this out and see how it enhances the vocal.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty.
You can tell that because I've adjusted the gain, it sounds a lot more subtle. However, if I left that gain at 0, best believe there would be a massive difference in terms of the frequency response. And the real key here is that you have the option to do that, but I just like having the flexibility of being able to reduce the gain, and that's why I'd recommend this Puigtech emulation over a lot of other Pultec emulations from other companies. Next, let's talk about compressors and what vocal would be complete without a solid opto compressor option. And there's no better opto compressor, at least for me, than the LA2A. And in In this case, it's the CLA2A, which is emulating the LA2A opto compressor. That's also another famous outboard unit. Now, what's interesting about opto compression is they naturally have a slower attack and release time, which leads them to sounding smoother, and that also makes them really well suited to vocals, and that's why I like to use them. Very simple to use, 2 knobs, a peak reduction, so it's sort of like a threshold type of functionality, and then a gain or a makeup gain function. I always will turn analog off. I'll usually set my high frequencies to the flat setting, and you do have a parallel option here if you want to use some parallel compression, which is something I've talked about in some of my other videos. But overall, this is a great compressor option that I'm pretty much using on every single vocal. And what's crazy is I actually prefer this over a lot of other LA2A options as well. Again, not throwing UAD under the bus, but I've shot it out with the UAD one, and I always somehow choose this one for some reason, even though on the surface I thought I would not. So let's actually play this, and I'll show you the example without and with the CLA2A.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee.
Now, I like what that's doing, and this is obviously why it's one of my go-tos, but I do find that what happens sometimes when compressing vocals is the frequency relationship between the vocal itself starts to change a little bit. You'll start to get a little bit more low end after compression, sometimes a little bit more high end, or sometimes not even either of those, it's just something completely different. But I do find that the relationship between the frequencies that make up the vocal will be altered in some sort of way. And for that reason, I love to follow the CLA2A with a multi-band compressor, and for that, I'm going to use the C6. You've definitely seen me use this in some of my other videos. It's not just great for vocals, but also mastering groups and so on. You don't have to do what I'm doing here, but I'm actually using all 6 bands available here. So that means I have these 4 bands in the middle, but then I have these 2 focus bands focused on the sibilant parts as well as the nasally honky parts of the vocal. Now, what's great about using a multi-band compressor is I could essentially reduce any frequency pocket that is too much, but do so dynamically, just like a dynamic EQ, meaning it'll be a lot more transparent. It won't be so noticeable, but it will definitely smooth things out if you have this issue. You could definitely only use it on one band. Sometimes I will only use it on the low end as an example if I find that the vocal is getting too muddy. And what's even more awesome is you can actually use this as an additive EQ as well. So look here at the end of my band here, you see I'm adding a little bit of frequency here with a positive range of +2. That basically means that we're actually starting with the high end hyped up or enhanced, but then whenever it becomes too much, it'll actually get reduced and come down to 0, so it's not being added to in this example, right? But it's always going to depend, but that adds a nice top end shine without it being too harsh or too overbearing at times. Let's check this out. I'll bypass the C6 and I'll put it in.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. I can manage like you GD. Hey.
While we're on the topic of dynamics, let's talk about limiters. I actually love to use limiters at times on my vocals to just squeeze a little bit more volume out of a vocal, okay? Now, you have to be careful when doing this, and I do have a whole video breaking down how I approach this process, which you can check out above and below. You can see here that I love using the Waves L1 limiter. It's just very simple. You got a threshold, you got an out ceiling, it's going to add gain automatically based on how you set this up, and you have a release setting. Very simple. Using the auto release actually makes your life even easier because then you don't even have to think about it. It'll just calculate the release time for you based on the material being fed into it. Now, check out how I could just squeeze a little bit more volume out of this, get a slight amount of gain reduction, but without totally killing the vocal as a whole.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. I can manage like you GD. Hey.
So I'm getting about maybe 1 to 2 dB at most of gain reduction, and it's like occasional. It's not even happening. As opposed to that, I'm basically just getting a pure volume benefit. But because of the out ceiling, I'm able to essentially cap how much comes out of this limiter, and I basically am able to avoid clipping altogether, which is really handy, especially as you add more plugins and you start going crazy. It should not replace gain staging by any means, but it is a really helpful and convenient tool to just squeeze a little bit more volume out of stuff, especially if you're mixing on top of, let's say, 2-track beats where you have no control over the elements of your 2-track beat and what's a part of that, and instead you just have the whole stereo file. A lot of times producers these days are actually mastering those beats beats and adding limiters themselves, and you'll basically never fully be able to have your vocal sit perfectly in that without limiting it to some degree. I have some videos on that as well, which I'll also plug above and below, but check out the Waves L1 limiter if you're looking for a very simple limiter solution, especially on individual vocal tracks like this. So far, everything I've shown you has been an individual plugin, but depending on your workflow, you may want something that's a little bit more streamlined and all in one kind of package. Well, look no further than a channel strip for that. One of my favorite channel strips that's out there is the solid state Logic EV2 from Waves, and I've literally worked on SSL consoles in the past, and it does a great job of mirroring that, and not only mirroring that, but also giving you the flexibility of different types of SSL consoles, such as the black and brown version of the EQ it has here. You can see how this channel strip has literally everything you need. You have a preamp, line, and mic section, so you can add some gain and volume to your source. You have a compression and dynamic section, which is a compressor, an expander, and a gate. You actually have filters, so I can cut the lows and the highs. You have an EQ section, and again, that EQ has two different types of EQ styles here, being the black and brown EQ, which is famous on the SSL 4000 consoles. Depending on which console you had access to a different style of EQ. And not only that, you also have an output as well as any other standard feature you would expect, like phase reverse and so on. Now, like I said, if your workflow is to be very streamlined and you want everything in one package, this is the plugin to go to. You can literally do everything you want, and you don't even have to use every single module here. You can use just the EQ or just the compressor or just the filters and so on. But in this case, I've used every single one and bypassed every other plugin. So let's check out what result I got out of this so far. I'll bypass and put it in.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. I can manage like you GD.
Now, if you want a cool tip, if you want an analog workflow and sound in the box, put one of those on every single channel, and then you're going to be mixing as if you were literally sitting at a desk with all those channels in front of you, just like you would if you were at a studio. Definitely not exactly the same thing, but if you do prefer that workflow, that's where you come from, or if that's what you're looking for, this is definitely a plugin that you're going to want to check out. Now, if you love analog flavor like I do, you're going to definitely want to check out this next plugin, which is a saturation plugin called Waves Magma BB Tubes. I find this to be one of the most versatile saturation plugins out there. When I first encountered it, I didn't really care. I had so many of these other plugins and I'm like, what can this do differently or better? But for whatever reason, I find this is actually very simple to work with, and it really does create this huge analog sound when applying it to vocals, but also other types of sounds, drums, basses, and so on. I'll actually usually use this to warm up the low end of my vocals, but I can also use it to add a little bit more bite or sizzle to the top end with these two knobs, the Beauty knob and the Beast knob. I really love that as a bass relief knob, which will essentially offset the way that this plugin affects the low end of a vocal, so it won't actually create this bloated, muddy mess, but instead really warm it up and enhance it in a good way. And all the other features on this plugin are great and give you a lot of ways to shift the tonality of whatever you're applying it to. Even with the mix knob and the output knob, you have a sensitivity knob, so it doesn't really create this crazy distorted sound. There's so many ways you can manipulate this, so check it out on this vocal once again. I'll bypass it and put it in.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. I can manage like you GD.
Now, what vocal mix would be complete without some effects? I want to talk about two effects here, and the first one is going to be your standard reverb, and this is something that I actually was just put onto recently, being H Reverb. I love using the H series plugins from Waves, and H Reverb has pleasantly surprised me as of late, and that's because it offers so much customizability. You can actually adjust every aspect of your reverb, and I would actually normally do this not only with an actual reverb plugin, but by also applying additional processing after, like compressors, EQs, and so on. However, the beauty of this plugin is everything is pretty much self-contained within it. You can definitely adjust your reverb itself. I can extend the length either by manually dragging or using the actual meter here if I want. I have a whole built-in effects section and ways to manipulate the reverb, whether that's EQ or adding some compression or even controlling the echoes and the delays. I can add pre-delay. I can affect the early reverb tail. I even have a dry wet knob, of course, which is to be expected connected every possible thing that I could need for my reverb, even a drive functionality similar to a saturation. It's all here. Everything is here, and I'm able to manipulate this the way that I want to achieve a great sounding reverb. And so far, I've been having great results with it, usually just queuing up a preset and then manipulating it further from there. Let's hear how this reverb sounds on the vocal.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. I can manage like you GD. Hey.
I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty heavy-handed, obviously, but you get an idea of what you could do. You can create this colossal sounding reverb like I have here, or you could even sculpt it and make it tighter, right? You could actually drag this in and not have such a crazy reverberated sound.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee. Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. I can manage like you GD. Hey.
Now that's reverb, but what about delay? For delay, I love relying on the other H series plugin being H delay. And H delay, just like H reverb and a lot of these other plugins, is so versatile. I can do so much with this plugin. It's basically like a bunch of delays in one. Whether I want to do a standard quarter or eighth or half note delay, or if I want to do some sort of ping pong effect, or even create something that's more slappy or just something else in general, this delay has it all covered. Of course, you have your standard delay and feedback features where you can control the amount of an echo basically, or a repeat that'll come back, but you also have built-in filters that allows you to sculpt the sound and maybe make it sound more analog or just more filtered, more controlled. You even have modulation parameters here that'll basically allow you to achieve more flangey or chorusy type of effects. You of course have your dry wet knob, and you even have the analog knob, which does add some noise or sound to your effect. I don't really like using that personally. I don't think anybody does based on my conversations with a lot of other Waves users, so I leave that off. But every other feature here is so useful, and I will literally have 3 or 4 delays in a session, different types of delays, of course, but I'll have them all in my session ready to go so I can do a delay throw, just like what you're going to hear right now.
Makeup, got plenty. She savage, like Fenty. She did work hard looking like Edie. She did no French talking like wee wee.
Some great examples here of delay throws, and I've really just scratching the surface not only of using H delay, but really every plugin here. I've gone through this as quickly as I possibly could have and tried to keep it compact for you guys, but I highly recommend that if anything here interests you guys, you click the link in the description down below to check out each and every one of these plugins, and feel free to report back and let me know what you think of them as well when you try them out yourself. These are just some of my favorites, but there is plenty more that I'll be talking about in future videos. Now, if you want to see another video I did about 4 types of analog compression I use in every mix, click the card you see on screen right now to learn more. Don't forget to like the video before you take off and subscribe if you're new. I appreciate each and every one of you guys for watching, and I'm looking forward to helping you guys again in a future video. Peace.
5